Hey everyone, welcome to Group Text. This is a tough one today. I'm talking with Jim and Evelyn Piazza, whose son Timothy died as a result of college fraternity hazing while pledging Beta Theta Pi at Penn State University in February of 2017. It is beyond a horribly tragic story, as well as every parent's worst nightmare. And it's one part of the new A&E documentary series, House of Horrors, Secret of College Greek Life, which features firsthand accounts of how the secrecy surrounding fraternities and sororities create a dangerous environment where alcohol abuse, drug abuse, and sexual assault are able to thrive. The series is streaming now with new episodes every Monday at 9 p.m. Jim and Evelyn, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
I have a son that just graduated from college, so this was very, very hard for me, as I'm sure it is for you. I think it's really important for people to watch this docuseries, especially if you have kids heading to college or in college who might be interested in joining a fraternity or a sorority. I mean, the story of what happened to Tim and to your family is really unimaginable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Describe Timothy to me. What kind of a kid was he? What were his interests?
Oh, he was smart, he was athletic, he was funny, he loved video games. At the time Netflix was big, so he loved like The Walking Dead, liked playing, pickup basketball with his friends. He just really liked making everybody smile and laugh, like that was his job.
Yeah, and he was just a good guy, always interested in taking care of us, taking care of his friends, and I think always doing the right thing. I mean, I think he had a very good, demeanor. He was really good with young kids. He would go to the beach and find some young kids playing in the sand. They would help them build sand castles and stuff. It was kind of cute.
So, his older brother Michael went to Penn State. Was going to Penn State really important to him? Was he following his brother, or did he just love the whole university and everything Penn State was about?
In the beginning, when Mike was at Penn State and Tim was, filling out his applications and all, he wouldn't even come to football games with us because he didn't want to color his judgment at all. So it's not like it was his primary goal. He finally had it narrowed down between Penn State and Villanova, and the two totally different schools. So he went to a big high school. They had like 3,200 kids, and he just didn't want to go to a school that was smaller than his high school. And we think the tipping point was that his older brother was at Penn State, and it had a great engineering program.
Michael did not join a fraternity. Why did Tim? I know for my son, it was about finding, especially because he was a transfer from a very small school to a big school, was feeling grounded in a social group and finding, at least in the beginning, who were his type of people. Is that what led Tim to a fraternity?
I think so. I mean, I used to talk to both my boys about networking and the importance of networking and getting involved with groups and whatnot. And I think for Tim, he thought joining a fraternity like some of his roommates had done would make the big school smaller and would be a great platform for him to network within. I think that's really what he was focused on. And it just wasn't, apparently it just wasn't for Mike. He wasn't interested in it.
And I hate asking you to answer these questions. I really do, because it hits so close to home with me. Before we jump into it, explain to listeners who don't know what hazing is.
So hazing is intentionally causing somebody discomfort, embarrassment, or harm.
Risk of injury. In connection with joining an organization.
Or maintaining your status in that organization.
So what happened to Tim when he pledged Beta Theta Pi?
This was the very first night. It was bid acceptance night, and he reported to the house. He had gotten a text message earlier in the day saying, come to the house at this time, don't be late, prepare to get effed up, wear a jacket and shirt and tie. And they had their opening ceremony, so to speak, and then the hazing began with this alcohol obstacle course that they called the Gauntlet. They brought them downstairs, gave them a handle of vodka, and told them to go down the line and drink the whole handle. And it went back and forth 3 times before it was killed. And then one by one, they were let into this alcohol obstacle course. They had to drink vodka. They had to shotgun a beer. They had to drink from a wine bag. They had to do beer pong. And then at the end, when everybody was all done, and I think everybody went through in like 8 minutes, so it was fast. They shotgunned another beer as a group, and then they lined them up against the wall and handed them more alcohol, more vodka. And then they had their so-called social with a sister organization that was really an underground sorority that had reformed. And the fraternity brothers went and found all the pledges because they were wearing a shirt and tie, tapped them on the shoulder, handed them alcohol, and made them drink. And in 82 minutes, video shows that Tim had at least 18 drinks.
Yeah, I mean, but then to pick it up, he, one of the fraternity brothers saw that he looked like he was in bad shape, and we think he was trying to get him out of harm's way, brought him upstairs, put him on the couch. Unfortunately, he left him alone, so Tim, I think recognizing that he may be in bad shape himself, tried to leave the house, but he couldn't figure out how to open the front door. At least that's what it seems like, as we're told by the video. So he went back towards the basement for whatever reason, and that's when he fell down a flight of 15 steps, I think. Basically out cold, banged up and bruised. They 4 guys carried his limp body back up to the upstairs, threw him on a couch, and left him there. And throughout the night, they were throwing beer on him to try to wake him up, throw shoes at him, slapped him around. They backpacked him. They put a bunch of books in a backpack so that he didn't roll over on his back and vomit in his mouth. Basically just decided, all right, well, let's just go to bed. We'll leave him here. We don't want to call anybody for help, even though a bunch of people knew he needed help. But we don't want to call anybody because we'll get in trouble if we do that. So let's just let him sit here.
It's shocking, and we'll get into not necessarily more detail about that, but about what goes on. Because on paper, just like all fraternities and sororities, Beta Theta Pi says they're non-drinking, non-hazing. They all say that. It is not just them. They all claim to be on the straight and narrow. How do they get away with it, knowing that it's completely untrue? And it's not like some big secret that it's untrue. It's their charters. It's what they say. Their national bodies know. Everyone knows exactly what's going on. How do they get away with that?
Money certainly helps. Most of the national organizations are very, very well funded. Obviously, they put out these rules for legal liability purposes. They rarely, although I think it's starting to occur more, but they rarely hold people accountable when something goes wrong or when they hear of hazing going on. Some of the better fraternities now, they will expel the student from the fraternity if they find out that something's going on. But there's a lot of alumni out there who want to relive glory days in some cases, and they fight to just leave things the way they are, and there's a lot of money behind it.
I just also want to add that this goes on with a lot all teams as
well.
Yes,
absolutely.
And bands.
It's not just
and
fraternity.
bands. It's not just fraternity. It's all through the university life.
Yeah.
And in high school.
And in high school.
Yeah. But let's be clear. The
But in high
death,
school, you're going home, at least,
yes,
supposedly.
right. The deaths that occur, unfortunately, they occur mainly in fraternities and occasionally in sororities.
Yeah. My son was in a fraternity. Why do you think, and I thought about this a lot when he went to school, why do they hold so much power, not just within the student body, but within the structure of the university and university life?
It's the money. It's the alumni. The alumni from the organizations donate a lot of money to the universities. Even in our case, we've heard of a lot of alumni that were pushing back on the rule changes that were made at Penn State because they said they're going to hinder the fraternities. They're going to kill the fraternity life, the Greek life at Penn State. They're going to hurt Thon. It's the money behind it. It's the alumni that won't let it go.
And I think also the ability for the, say, fraternities to have parties. And the girls are held to a different standard. They can't have the parties. They can't have alcohol. They can't have the boys in their houses. So if you want to be a part of the social scene, you need to be a part of Greek life.
Were either of you involved in Greek life when you were in college?
No.
So this was really foreign
Foreign.
to both of you. There is such a code of silence
Yeah.
in these organizations. And it's strange because I see my son and his friends, they have such strong moral compasses in most of their lives and were raised to have that, yet they get in these situations and not only do they make ridiculously tragic, in your case, decisions, but the code of silence. That's where I get where for me there's a personal disconnect, and thankfully my son was never in that situation. I just want to clarify that within his house. They actually had a very interesting thing, which was before people could go into the party, the front door was locked. So whoever was working it outside, they would wait till there were enough people, and they had to make a whole speech about, if you're uncomfortable, say something. There's snacks behind the bar. Ask for water. Like a whole. I mean, they all had to memorize it before they would let people in. Now, on hindsight, I don't know if that was tapping into, we've warned you, so now we can have the code of silence. But I never understood the code of silence. Like I said, especially in a group of kids that generally have strong moral compasses and wouldn't hesitate about helping someone on the street.
Right.
Exactly.
I think that's just drummed into their heads. You can't talk about this. We certainly saw it in our case. Nobody was willing to talk about what happened. I mean, I will say this. It doesn't make all of these members bad. One or two people could ruin it for the whole bunch. Now, at Beta Theta Pi, unfortunately, it was a little more pervasive. But we've seen situations where somebody, has been hurt or killed where it was only a couple of people that really did all the bad stuff. And, the other members, unfortunately, got dragged in with them because they were kind of just hanging around. It's not everybody's bad. But in our case, it was very pervasive throughout the organization.
One student did come forward. Cordell Davis, who met your son briefly when he was pledging. Who is Cordell?
Cordell had pledged the semester before, and he, of all people, knew the dangers because at this same event in his year or class, he missed the Gauntlet, but when he came, they told him to catch up, and he drank heavily and fell and split his head open. So he has a scar, and they all knew the dangers of drinking heavily just based on, how they dealt with him. They waited till the next morning until he was sobered up so that they could take him to a Medi center. And, he recognized that Tim needed help, and he tried to get it, and on more than one occasion, and they told him, you don't know what you're talking about, nobody wants you here, and we got it covered. What
gave Cordell the courage to speak out? Because the fraternity could not have reacted well to, and I'm just using this term because I can't think of a better one, to a whistleblower, so to speak.
Well, I mean, after the second time, they told him, you don't know what you're talking about, and then he left. They said, we don't want you around, and he left.
Well, they also threw him up against the wall,
Yeah.
and they bullied him,
Yeah.
and they threatened him, so that's why he left. I mean,
Yeah. But it's not like nobody else spoke up. Other people knew that Tim needed help, and they mentioned it, and they were shut down also.
I want to talk about the legal battle that happened in the wake of Tim's death. What were the charges? And I know we have to say alleged, and against whom? I hate having to do that, by the way. But we have to say that alleged.
Yeah, well, there were over, I think, 1,100 alleged charges against 20-something individuals initially. Over the series of about 7 or 8 preliminary hearings and 6 different judges, a lot of the charges got pared down by those judges, some who are not even attorneys. One was a probation officer, one was a former cop. So the charges that remained were all misdemeanors. The felony charges were all killed because there was no case law, unfortunately. And while I think some of the alleged charges should have held up, they didn't. So we were left with a bunch of hazing, conspiracy to haze, furnishing of alcohol, reckless endangerment of another person type of charges, which are still serious, but they're not, at the level of felony, of course.
They don't have a lot of teeth.
Yeah. So it was a bit disappointing because in other states where this has happened with no video and just people's recounting of what happened, there were more significant charges and jail time that students endured.
I'm fascinated, and again, this is sort of a generalized statement against or regarding these organizations and universities. How did Penn State, and I know they've changed the rules since, how did they close their eyes to this, and also knowingly that this goes on? And I know a lot of it is, it's not a campus property, but the fraternities and sororities are recognized at the university. Was it the Panhellenic Council? I mean, they're given the stamp of approval. Why are their eyes constantly shut? Isn't that what the ombudsman's for? And the provost?
Yeah, I think, they try to distance themselves from it because of liability, right?
Right.
And in Penn State's case, they knew that there were issues. They had a task force that was in place in 2015 that found all kinds of problems, but nothing ever happened. We had people from the task force reach out to us and tell us that it fell on deaf ears. Even when the stuff happened with Tim, there was a bit of denial there until they started really, learning everything that happened, and we would not accept the denial, frankly. And at some point, I think the president of the university, he got it, and he stepped up and he said, all right, we're going to make changes. This is ridiculous. This can't happen. And, he did a lot of good things, and he's not there anymore, but, I think those things will hopefully continue.
They seem to close their eyes quite a lot. Or
Yeah.
I can think of this and one other time where it really, they should have said something earlier. Pennsylvania now has an anti-hazing law in Tim's name. How much does that mean to you, and what does it do?
So it has degrees of charges. So there's hazing, there's misdemeanor hazing, and then there's aggravated hazing, which is a felony when it causes significant injury or death. And now the penalty could be 7 years in jail and up to $15,000 fine. Organizations can now be held accountable also, and there is medical amnesty incorporated in that. So if you call on behalf of somebody else and stay with that person, both you and the victim will be safe from, legal repercussions. And finally, there's a transparency piece that requires all of the schools, all the colleges, to have a report card on their website that has a 5-year look back, so that parents and students can look up an organization, look up this report card, and see if there is anything that happened with XYZ organization, and what the charge was, and what the finding was, and what the penalty was. And then you can make an educated decision knowing, okay, they had a hazing charge and they had to do this. Maybe this isn't the organization for you. We didn't have that ability when Tim was going to pledge.
You talk about the importance of the medical amnesty, because and one of the most horrifying thing, awful things to think of as a parent, and this was incredibly hard to watch. If someone had called, Tim probably would have a different result.
Yeah, when we were in the hospital, that next day, I looked at the doctor in the emergency room and I said, if somebody had called to get him help earlier, would we have a different outcome here? And he just, kind of looked at me and nodded his head and said, yeah, and just kind of looked to the floor, because you could tell that he was very disturbed by it.
How do you get your head around this? And I can't imagine that you will ever truly be able to do it. Because I was talking to one of my producers earlier, and I'm like, I would have burned the house down. I would have been at the doorstep with a blowtorch and fuck it, put me in jail. I don't care. How did you deal with that? How did you find the strength to go a legal route and be able to make a change? I don't know if I could ever get to the point where I could make a change, although I wish I would be able to. I tried to, with, again, a medical situation with my mother and a malpractice, and we were going to do Jones Law, but it just became too much. And I still feel remiss about it, but at the time it became too much. How did you, and I know people hate being asked that, how did you do it? I mean, because I just know my anger would not have been, it would have been, I'm scared to say anything in case I do burn something down one day and it's suddenly becomes premeditated. So I'm also trying not to say to people, I'm going to kill you on my texts anymore, just in case. I don't want, at least let's get it down to not a capital crime.
Right. I think for us, all the things that you're thinking and feeling, we of course felt that, and I often feel it on a recurring basis. But we have another son to worry about, and we hired a super level-headed, smart, compassionate attorney that guided us and continues to guide us through this process. And without him, I don't know. We might have had very different reactions and outcomes, but he was a godsend, if you can believe it.
Kept us in check.
How's Michael doing? He must feel so much responsibility just from even being at Penn State. I'm sure there's a lot of churning emotion within him. How did he cope with this?
I think a lot for him is being the older brother, and you're supposed to protect your younger brother, and he wasn't able to do that. So I think there is some guilt on his part, some survivor guilt, so to speak. And, he found Tim in the hospital, so he has that portion that was all by himself. He's got those memories, and we don't know, we weren't there. So he has a weight on him, and I think he also feels like now he needs to fill 2 sets of shoes. And, we just need to keep telling him, you're Mike, you're, separate, and make sure that we give him all the attention that he deserves and not make everything about Tim too.
Yeah, right or wrong, we try to keep him out of some of this stuff, even though he gets aggravated that we try to keep him out of some of this stuff. But I think the parental protection gene in us is like, he doesn't need to be involved in everything that we do.
This past July, actually only on the 30th, the president and vice president of the fraternity at the time of Tim's death pled guilty to 14 counts of hazing and 1 count of reckless endangerment. Does it feel a little too little, a little too late?
Yeah.
It's been a really long time.
It's almost 8 years. But yeah, it does. Although the alternative was 3 weeks in a jury trial in Center County, Pennsylvania, which I was not looking forward to. And they pled guilty to all remaining charges, so it's not like we could have asked for more at this point.
Why were those two the ones that stepped up and took the responsibility? Just because of the nature that they were the president and vice president at the time?
Well, a bunch of other ones already pled out. They already
Okay.
pled guilty. I think it took so long with these guys is because the attorney general who took over the case from the district attorney wasn't going to back down on the charges, rightfully so. And I think they just finally said, all right, enough. I mean, and I suspect they caught wind of some of the depositions that had taken place in the civil trial, and the smear campaign for Tim wasn't working. So, I think they realized this is a futile thing, and 3 more weeks in court is expensive.
And court was supposed to be during National Hazing Prevention Week and would have covered Tim's birthday.
Yeah,
So not a good look.
I think the media.
Not a good look. Not a good look. So, Jim, you've had a very, very powerful message to members of the fraternity that Tim was pledging that night. Can you share that with us about who they are on paper versus what they actually promote within the walls?
Well, I mean, look, there were, as I said, I think in this case, the bad activities were somewhat pervasive throughout the organization. Not everybody. I mean, we know of a couple of situations where there were a couple of seniors that weren't there. They weren't in the house that night. They had already moved out, but they, found out about what happened to Tim. And, we heard through the grapevine that their view was that the leadership of this fraternity was just a bunch of bad apples, and they had created a scenario that just wasn't good for anyone in that house. As I said earlier, it could only 1 or 2 individuals could bring it all down. But in this case, there were more than one that conspired to do the things that happened that night and conspired to not get help.
Yeah, fucking idiots. That's all I gotta say.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that you're participating in this and talking so openly about this and doing what you're doing is truly extraordinary. Truly extraordinary. Houses of Horrors: The Secrets of College Greek Life on A&E is now streaming. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.